This is my audience for my research presentation paper. Hi, audience. The Iroquois Indians were established around 1142 AD. Unlike other tribes, they were agricultural rather than nomadic, meaning that instead of following the buffalo herds and traveling wherever they went, they stayed behind and cultivated their own crops. They mainly resided in New York and southern Canada. They were made up of 5 nations, which were the Mohawks, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, the Cayugas, and the Senecas. This was until 1712, when the Tuscaroras joined and formed the Six-Nation Iroquois Confederacy. Up until 1600s, they initially fought and made war with each other. Around that time, however, they decided to band together. Doing this enabled them to form one of the earliest and strongest democracies in America. They provided a strong government and military base to protect their farmland. And although each tribe took care of its own problems, they relied on the council at Onondaga to settle matters that involved all nations. The unity between the nations, along with their relations with certain European countries, made the Iroquois Confederacy a force to be reckoned with. In the early 1600s, the Dutch began to trade firearms with the Iroquois. The Iroquois, in return, would give them beaver pelts, which were very valuable in Europe at the time because they were made to make hats. In Europe, they were very scarce, so being so highly in demand, France decided to trade with the Dutch and the Iroquois in order to get these pelts. When France was cut out of the deal, they began to make war with the Iroquois Indians. The Iroquois War, also known as the Beaver Pelt War, started around 1601. These series of conflicts were primarily between the Iroquois and the French, along with the French allies such as the Algonquin Indians. But like I said before, the tensions arose when the Iroquois and the Dutch cut out the French from their profitable beaver pelt trade. But what really solidified the enmity between the French and the Iroquois was when the French captain Huron killed 2 Iroquois chiefs in 1640, saying, "I had no other intention than to make war." When beavers became scarce around the Iroquois land in New York, the Indians began to brutally slaughter the other Indian tribes and as well as the French colonists who were residing around the New York State area. Mostly the people they killed lived in modern-day Ohio and Pennsylvania. They drove them out with their New Age weapons. The new guns that the Iroquois had acquired from the Dutch made it easy to decimate the other tribes who were still armed with just regular flint-tipped arrows. The survivors of the Iroquois attacks were given the chance to join the 5 nations by learning their language and customs, and were essentially absorbed into Iroquois culture. However, some weren't so lucky. Some of them were blinded and just sent into the wilderness until they starved, or they were burned at the stake. These bloody hit-and-run battles lasted almost a century, according to most historians, and this ended in 1701 with the Great Peace Treaty. By the end of the war, the Iroquois had expanded their territory all around the Great Lakes, including southern Canada. These Indians enjoyed prosperity until the American Revolutionary War, in which they were divided and dispersed. The Americans, realizing that the Iroquois were the most powerful Indian army, as well as a great asset to Great Britain, their enemy, tried to sway them away from their British ally by promising gifts. Because they were so poor from their war efforts, they were unable to actually deliver on those promises. Some Iroquois stood by the colonists, while others, who were angry that their land was taken by the colonists, stood by the British. Either way, on both sides, there were thousands of Indian casualties. The Iroquois survivors fled, or they accepted living on the reservations awarded to them in Canada and northeastern America. Eventually, they had their meeting place for their confederacy in Canada taken away from them in the 1950s. They were never as strong as they were before the war, and since the American Revolutionary War, they've been forced to live by America's rules and sometimes are required to do labor for them, such as constructing bridges. Today, there are around 54,000 Iroquois Indians living in North America. They fight to be recognized as their own sovereign state instead of just an ethnic group, and they are trying to change laws regarding Indian affairs, such as how much property they can own. There are several signifiers that make this culture recognizable. First are the physical traits of the Iroquois Indians. The Iroquois men are described as being very tall and muscular, with dark eyes and long dark hair. Women are also described as being tan with dark hair and dark eyes. The men didn't wear shirts during the summer, but when the air got cooler, they would wear garments made out of breechcloth. They additionally donned kilts made out of soft animal skin. Women wore skirts or dresses made from deerskin. Both genders wore moccasins and leggings, and the children were basically stark naked until age 7. The second signifier is the type of dwelling they live in. The term that the Iroquois like to refer to themselves as is called Haudenosaunee, which means people of the longhouse. A longhouse is a long, narrow, one-room building that houses several families. There is little privacy, and there are a couple spots inside where fires can be made. There are log walls that encase the longhouses in the village, which served as defense. In ancient times, the longhouse would be decorated with the scalp of enemies. In fact, when there was a war, an Indian would wear the scalp of the enemies he killed as decoration and as war medals. Another signifier that someone is an Iroquois Indian is a wampum belt. The wampum belt was sacred to them. They were made of purple and white seashells, and they were a form of currency with the white settlers. Additionally, they were also used to communicate with other tribal members and were carried by Indian messengers while visiting other tribes, according to the Native American Encyclopedia. The Iroquois are described by some historians as savages, particularly when referring to the Mohawk tribe, who were rumored to eat their enemies. Despite this, other historians and the surviving ancestors of the Iroquois describe the tribe as one that had a deep sense of brotherhood and hospitality. The Iroquois don't need police because they have very little crime rate due to the respect and sense of community they have. Even domestic violence is very rare in Iroquois culture. Along with a sense of brotherhood with each other, they also have a kinship with the earth, and they believe in preserving it for the future generations. One of the Indian chiefs were quoted as saying, "Nations are taught to respect the world in which they live because they are borrowing from future generations. Our value is especially important in terms of culture. Keeping cultural practices, languages, and ceremonies alive is essential if those to come are to continue to practice the Iroquois culture." The Iroquois highly value their unique ceremonies as well. They typically have 6 of them a year, aside from the ones held in the case of wakes, memorial feasts, burials, adoptions, or sealing of friendships, according to everyculture.com. The new year begins with the Midwinter Festival, held in January, when the men return from a fall hunt. It lasts for 5 days, followed by 2 or 3 days of game playing. People give confessions, clean their homes, and thank their creator for the past year, as well as celebrate with dice games. A couple months later, they celebrate the Thanks to the Maple Festival. It's a one-day festival that includes social dances and the ceremonial burning of tobacco at the base of a maple tree. In May or June, corn seeds are blessed at the corn planting ceremony in a half-day ritual. The Strawberry Festival is celebrated in June, where dancers perform and people give thanks for the ripening berries. The Green Corn Festival is in August. It's a 5-day ceremony that includes dancing, game playing, and rituals similar to Thanksgiving in America, with lots of feasts and people giving thanks. After the crops have all been harvested and stored away in October, they hold the Harvest Festival. All these festivals celebrate the pagan gods, such as the Three Sisters, who are the spirits of corn, beans, and squash. These ceremonies are a part of their religious worship of nature. They believe in 2 prophets, as well as the great spirit Tara Chaiwagan, or holder of the heavens. They believe that this spirit was more powerful than any of their other gods. He created the universe and takes care of the Iroquois by controlling the harvest and weather, which is why they give thanks. Dreams are also a vital part of their religion. They believe that dreams are supernatural signs from the Great Spirit. They are also seen as manifestations of a person's innermost desires. A man named Handsome Lake received a series of dreams that led him to become a religious figure for Iroquois in the 1800s. Dreams can be taken very literally as divine guidance. Councilmen who dreamed of resigning would actually resign because of them. Their belief in how funerals should be practiced was another part of their religion. Once a person dies, their soul leaves the body and then inhabits the village, living unseen among them. They would leave the body lying on a public scaffold for days because they were worried that the spirit might want to re-enter the body. Occasionally this would happen and the corpse would be reanimated, although it's more likely that the person was just unconscious rather than dead. During the long mourning period, anybody who had a similar name to that person who died had to give up the name until the grievance was over. The attitudes the Iroquois have towards women and children are vastly different from other cultures. In this culture, women are in charge of property, and although they are in charge of child rearing, they can work as they please. They can choose whether or not they want to go to work and how much they want to work. When a couple is married, the man moves to the woman's longhouse, and in the event of a divorce, he must go back to live with his father. According to HaudenoSaunee-Confederacy.com, the most common misconception about Iroquois is that they live in teepees and partake in powwows. The Indian author of the website takes offense to that, since their name literally means people of the longhouse. The only Indians who lived in teepees were the nomadic buffalo hunters. Additionally, although festivals are a big part of Iroquois culture, powwows are a different type of ceremony that is part of the Plains Indians culture. The Iroquois don't like to be grouped in with other Indians in that matter because they are distinctly different. They deserve to be recognized as one of the biggest and most powerful tribes in America. The Iroquois also don't like the notion that America was just unexplored land before the Europeans conquered it. Many other Indians share this irritation because their ancestors cultivated and lived on the land before anyone else did. Many of their people and cultures were wiped out with the arrival of Europeans, and it's almost as if history was rewritten to not include the Native Americans. Everything I've written in this paper was fascinating to me, so it's hard to reflect on just one wow moment. I would have to say that one of the most interesting aspects of this culture is how they raise their children. They are given names as babies, and then when they reach puberty, they are given a new adult name, such as Hanging Flower. When a child begins going through puberty, they are put through a series of tasks that are designed to mold them into adults. A girl must live isolated in a hut for the duration of her first period. She is required to perform difficult tasks such as chopping wood with a dull axe, and is prohibited from eating certain food. The trials a young man must endure are harsher. He must live in a secluded cabin in a forest for up to a year, with a man or a woman monitoring him for his well-being. He isn't afforded much food and spends his time doing physically demanding tasks like swimming in icy waters and scraping his shins with a stone. The quest is only completed when he is visited by a spirit. This is all according to the Department of Bucknell University. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all had a good year.